Calder Royce was just a quiet mountain man, the kind who fixed broken fences, kept to himself, and trusted no one but his husky, Frost. But the day Frost stopped on that moss-covered ridge, the day he growled at a steel door no one knew existed, was the moment an ordinary man and his dog became the only ones who could stop a secret buried for decades. Because sometimes, the heroes we never expect are the only ones the mountains send.
The first cold wind of early autumn had started to move through Silver Pine Ridge, slipping down out of the Montana high country like a quiet warning. It carried the smell of wet earth and spruce pitch, of rivers running colder and days growing shorter, and it moved through the trees around Calder Royce's cabin the way an old friend might push open a familiar door. The mountains here were not gentle. They rose in dark, layered walls, ridge lines like the backs of sleeping giants, their shoulders scarred by old logging cuts and forgotten mine roads. In the evenings, when the last light slid off the granite and the shadows pooled in the draws, a man could feel very small out here. Small and very alone. Calder had made his peace with that a long time ago. He was just past 40, with the kind of face the wilderness carved for itself. Strong jaw, nose broken once and never quite set right, deep lines at the corners of his eyes from years spent squinting into wind and snow. A beard the color of dark rust framed his mouth, streaked here and there with silver that hadn't been there 10 winters ago. His hair, kept just long enough to curl beneath the brim of his weathered hat, held the same mix of brown and gray, as if the mountain nights had slowly worked their way into him. He wore a battered brown leather jacket that had seen its share of storms, a flannel shirt faded to soft reds and blacks, and jeans stained by sap, dust, and engine grease. Everything about him said use, not style. Once, in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else, he had worn a uniform instead. Army green, then later a sheriff's brown. Back then he'd believed in chains of command, in reports and procedures, in the idea that if you followed the rules, the world would more or less hold together. Then came the call about his younger brother, the drug raid that had gone sideways, the official story that never matched the witnesses who disappeared one by one. Calder had watched the town he grew up in close ranks around a lie, had watched people choose convenience over truth, and something inside him had quietly broken off. He'd sold what little he owned, moved up into the timber, and built a life that didn't require anybody's permission. The only soul he trusted since then padded across the porch beside him now, nails ticking softly against the old boards. Frost had been a half-starved pup the first time Calder saw him, all angles and ribs behind the chain link of a county shelter, pale eyes too bright for a dog that young. He was 10 years old now, a full-bodied husky with a coat that shifted from snow-white along his belly to storm-cloud gray over his back, ears sharp as arrowheads, and eyes the color of winter sky before a storm. There was more wolf than pet in the way he moved, smooth, aware of every sound in the trees, head constantly turning as if mapping threats on some invisible grid. He liked people well enough when Calder said they were safe, but he'd never quite lost the wary stiffness of a dog who knew he'd once been thrown away. Out here, that made him perfect. He scented black bear before Calder ever saw the tracks, heard distant engines long before their growl reached the cabin, and he had an uncanny way of pacing between Calder and anything that felt wrong, as if he could stand between his human and the whole bad history of the world. That morning the fog was still lifting out of the pines when Calder stepped off the porch, mug of coffee in one hand, the other resting lightly on Frost's head. A low ceiling of gray hung over the ridge, but light was filtering through, turning the lingering mist into thin veils between the trees. It should have been an ordinary day.
There were fallen limbs to clear from the upper trail, a drip he needed to fix in the cabin roof before the first snow, and an old generator that had been complaining louder than usual when he asked it for power. The kind of to-do list that made sense, solid and simple. "Let's see what kind of trouble the mountains got for us, boy," he murmured, setting the mug down and shrugging on his pack. Frost gave a quiet huff, the breath fogging in the cool air, and trotted ahead as they followed the narrow path that cut away from the cabin and into the thicker timber. For the first mile, everything felt normal. The ground springy with layers of pine needles, crossbills chattering overhead, a distant woodpecker striking a hollow trunk like a slow, steady drum. Calder moved with the unhurried efficiency of a man who knew every bend in the trail, every rock that stayed slick even in dry weather. He paused now and then to cut a small deadfall with his handsaw, dragging branches to the side so winter hikers wouldn't twist an ankle here or there. It was work he liked. Quiet, useful, owed to no one but the mountain itself. He almost missed the moment everything changed. Frost was 20 yards ahead, tail level, head low, nose working the air. That wasn't unusual. The dog lived through his nose. But then Frost stopped dead, every muscle locking stiff. His tail dropped, hackles rising in a rigid line along his spine. A low growl rolled out of his chest, not the excited rumble he had for deer or elk, but something deeper, edged with a note Calder rarely heard. Fear. "Frost," Calder called softly. "Easy, boy. What do you see?" The dog didn't look back. Instead, he took 3 slow steps forward into a patch of undergrowth where the hillside swelled into a mossy hump, then flattened himself, as if whatever he was looking at might strike. Calder's own heartbeat ticked up a notch. There were old mine shafts in these hills, sinkholes where careless feet could vanish. He'd marked most of them years ago, but the mountain had a way of swallowing its own wounds and letting them surface someplace new. Hand sliding to the handle of the small wrench clipped to his belt, a habit from years of fixing things even when there was nothing obvious to fix, he moved toward Frost. At first, the mound looked like any other, a hump of earth and stone, ferns draped over it, roots digging down through damp soil. But the closer Calder got, the more wrong it felt. The shape was too regular beneath the moss, the slope too clean. He knelt, pressed his gloved hand into the green, and felt not earth, but cold metal beneath the spongy growth. A faint rectangular edge revealed itself as he brushed the moss aside, then another, until the outline of a door emerged. A steel slab set horizontally into the hillside, almost flush with the ground, hinges buried deep, front eaten by rust. Frost whined, backing up a step, nose working furiously. Calder stared. In all his years running these trails, he had never once noticed so much as a bolt head out here. Someone had gone to real trouble to hide this. Trouble, in his experience, usually meant one thing: secrets not meant for honest eyes. He should have walked away. That was the first clear thought that came. Leave it shut. Let whoever buried it keep their ghosts. But another thought followed harder on its heels, stubborn as rock. These were his mountains now. Anything hidden under them was under his feet, near his cabin, on his watch. Ignoring it felt like ignoring a crack in a dam. He found the recessed handle clogged with dirt and pulled his wrench free to chip away the rust. Metal shrieked softly in protest, flakes of orange-brown falling like brittle leaves. It took time, sweat beading under his hat in the cool air, but eventually something gave with a dull, heavy pop. He braced one shoulder against the steel and pushed. The door rose grudgingly, hinges groaning, and a breath of air exhaled from the dark below. Stale, mineral, touched with a faint odor of oil and something else he couldn't quite name. It smelled like the past, shut up too long. A narrow stairwell dropped away into shadow, concrete walls damp and sweating. Frost backed off another step, ears pinned, but his eyes never left the opening. Calder felt the hairs rise on his own arms. Caves and cellars didn't bother him. He'd slept in worse. But this wasn't natural, and it wasn't old in the way of abandoned root cellars or storm shelters. This had purpose to it. Angles too precise, air too heavy with waiting. "What in the hell did you find for us, boy?" he murmured, voice barely more than breath. He reached for the flashlight clipped to his pack, thumb resting on the switch, and froze at the sound of a branch snapping somewhere behind him. It was a sharp, clear crack, not the random fall of dead wood, but the weight of a boot finding the wrong place. Calder turned, every muscle ready, expecting a lost hiker, a ranger, maybe some tourist who'd wandered too far off the trail. What he saw instead knocked the air right out of his chest. She stood a little down the slope, half-shadowed by a stand of spruce, as if the forest had been hiding her until it
decided whether or not to let her go. May Whitlock. 7 years hadn't done a damn thing to dull the recognition. She was leaner now, as if life had been sanding her down to essentials, but the line of her jaw was the same, the way she held her shoulders slightly tense, like someone braced for a blow she refused to flinch from. Her hair, once a wild fall of copper waves, was pulled back into a low knot at the nape of her neck, threads of darker red braided through sun-bleached strands. A denim shirt hugged her frame beneath a canvas jacket the color of dry wheat, and her jeans were smeared with dust, as if she'd been walking a long way before she got here. Her eyes, storm gray, searching, met his, and for a heartbeat they were both back in the little tavern in town where she'd once laughed at something he said, hand resting on his arm like she'd been afraid to let go. Back before the note, before the empty house, before she vanished without a forwarding address or a goodbye that made any sense. "Calder," she said, his name leaving her lips on a breath that sounded like it had been waiting for years to escape. Frost trotted halfway toward her, then paused, head cocked, tail giving a single uncertain wag. He remembered her scent, Calder realized, remembered her hands in his fur. The mountain kept all kinds of memories. "May," Calder managed, voice rougher than he intended. "Didn't expect to see you anywhere on this side of the country. Or any other." A flicker of something, guilt maybe, or sorrow, moved across her face. "I didn't expect to come back," she answered. "Not unless—" Her gaze slid past him then, to the open door yawning dark in the hillside. Whatever color she had drained out of her cheeks. "Not unless that," she finished softly. She climbed the last few yards toward him, boots careful on the damp ground, and when she reached the edge of the open hatch, she stopped, hugging herself as though the air had turned 20 degrees colder. Up close, Calder could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the weariness in the set of her mouth. This was not a woman whose years away had been easy. "You know what this is?" he asked. She nodded, once, slow. "I know enough." Her fingers went to the inside pocket of her jacket, fumbling for something, and came out with a small, weathered notebook bound in cracked brown leather. The edges of the pages were frayed, corners bent as if thumbed through 1,000 times. She held it as carefully as a live coal. "My father kept this," she said, "back when we still lived down in Ashford." Calder remembered her father only in fragments, a man with oil under his nails and a mind always half somewhere else, working on problems no one in town understood. Folks said he consulted for the military sometimes, designing systems and sensors none of them could pronounce. Quiet, polite, distant. He'd gone missing not long before May disappeared. Calder had. Always assumed she left because grief had hollowed the town out for her. Now, Looking at the door, at the fear hiding behind her eyes, he realized grief had only been part of it. "He used to drive up into these hills for work," May continued, voice catching. "Said he was helping with a project, something about monitoring, communications, keeping people safe. Only later I heard him on the phone at night, arguing with someone, saying it had gone too far, that it wasn't about safety anymore." She swallowed, thumb worrying at a cracked spot on the notebook's spine. "The last night I saw him, he sat me down and told me one thing I have never been able to forget. If the door in the hill ever opens, you run, May. You don't ask why, you don't look back, you just run." The wind stirred the treetops, sending a soft hiss through the branches. Down in the open hatch, the darkness seemed to lean closer, listening. "Next morning he was gone," May said quietly. "No body, no note. His truck turned up empty at the edge of the forest road 2 towns over. They called it a disappearance, maybe a breakdown, maybe he just walked away. But I knew better." She lifted the notebook, its pages fluttering faintly. "This is what he left behind. Blueprints, lists, references to equipment buried under silver pine, and names crossed out so hard the paper nearly tore. Under those, he wrote 2 words. She looked up at Calder, and he saw the sheen of unshed tears that had nothing soft about them. "Erased people." Calder took the journal from her, fingers brushing hers for an instant that sent an old, unwelcome heat through his chest. Inside the pages were a mixture of cramped handwriting and precise diagrams, aerial maps of the ridge, sketches of antenna arrays, notes about field tests and data collection. Here and there, phrases leaped out. Unauthorized surveillance, off-record relocation, subjects removed from all public documents. And always, in the margins, those names with heavy lines through them, as if someone had been trying to scrub them out of the world. "You think whatever happened to your father is tied to this place," Calder said slowly, "and to whatever these people were doing up here." "I don't think," May replied, jaw tightening. "I know. He told me if the door ever opened, it meant someone was still watching, that they'd either come back to finish what they started or something had gone wrong with their equipment. Either way, it was a sign." She took a breath that shook just a little. "I tried to forget it. Tried to make a life somewhere the word ridge never appeared on a map. But last month, I got a call from a lawyer in Billings. A box in a safety deposit my father had rented suddenly flagged to be opened, 10 years late. Inside was a key, this journal, and coordinates that led right back here, to Silverpine, to this slope." She glanced at Frost, who was standing pressed against Calder's leg now, gaze fixed on the darkness below. "And then I hear from an old friend in Ashford that there's a man living alone up here, with a husky that doesn't bark at storms but can't stand walking past this part of the trail." A wry, pained smile touched her mouth. "There aren't many men like you, Calder. I figured that had to be you. And if you and your dog were uneasy here..." She let the sentence trail off because she didn't need to finish it. The fact that Frost had been the one to find the hidden steel was answer enough. Calder closed the journal, feeling the weight of it settle into his palm. The pages smelled faintly of old ink and machine oil, of nights spent writing by the kind of man who believed that if you recorded a wrong carefully enough, someday someone might make it right. He looked at May, at the thin white scar high on her cheekbone he'd never seen before, at the way she kept her shoulders squared even though every part of her seemed tired. "So," he said quietly, "we've got a hidden door nobody was supposed to open, a dead or missing engineer who changed his mind too late,
and a notebook full of people someone decided shouldn't exist. And you show up the same day I pry this thing loose. I didn't plan the timing, she replied, but my father did. Whatever he wanted me to see, he meant for me to see it with someone who wouldn't scare easy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The forest hummed softly, a jay screeching in the distance, the sigh of wind through needles, the drip of last night's rain from a high branch. Calder realized, with a clarity that made his stomach knot, that the life he'd built out here, quiet, small, stubbornly separate, had just collided head-on with the one thing he'd sworn to avoid: other people's secrets. But there was more than obligation tugging at him. There was the way May's voice shook when she said, "Father." There was the memory of her laughter in the back of a pickup under summer stars. There was the simple fact that she had come back to these mountains knowing full well they might swallow her whole. And there was Frost, who, despite his unease, had taken 2 steps closer to the open hatch, sniffing with the focused attention he used when game was near or danger closer than he liked. "You could still walk away," May said suddenly, as if reading something in his expression. "Close it up. Pretend you never saw it. I won't blame you. The people behind this, they erased folks like they were pencil marks on a page. Whatever took my father, whatever made me run 7 years ago, it's all tied to this place, this program. I can't promise it won't try to chew you up too." Calder studied her. Behind the warning in her words, he heard something else, the faintest edge of hope that he'd stay. He thought about the years of silence between them, the way her absence had left an empty shape he'd refused to name. Maybe this was the mountain's way of saying some stories weren't finished yet. He slid the notebook into his pack, then reached for the flashlight again. "You said the door opening is a sign," he murmured. "Seems to me, signs are only useful if somebody's willing to follow them." For the first time since she'd stepped out of the trees, May's eyes softened. A breath he hadn't realized she'd been holding escaped her, and a tiny, almost disbelieving smile touched her lips. "You always were too stubborn for your own good," she said. "Guess I was counting on that." Calder stepped to the edge of the hatch. The beam of his flashlight cut into the darkness, revealing concrete steps slick with moisture, walls stained by time, the faint impression of boot prints in old dust that said they weren't the first ones here. Frost moved forward without being asked, placing one paw on the top step, then the next, muscles tight but determined. The dog's ears flicked back, catching some sound below that human ears couldn't yet parse, and he glanced over his shoulder once as if to say, "Are you coming or not?" Calder felt it then, a prickle between his shoulder blades, the instinct honed from years in uniform and more years alone. The sense of eyes where no eyes should be. The forest behind them looked unchanged, but the air had taken on that strange, held breath quality it got before a storm or a shot you never heard coming. Something, somewhere, was paying attention. He checked the revolver at his hip out of habit, then offered his free hand to May. She hesitated only a second before taking it, fingers cool but firm in his. They descended together into the waiting dark, Frost leading the way, and as the light from the world above narrowed to a thin, distant rectangle behind them, Calder couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been watching had just seen exactly what it wanted. 2 people and a dog stepping over a line they'd never be able to uncross. The stairwell funneled them into a corridor that smelled of damp concrete and long-dead electricity, the flashlight's beam cutting a narrow silver path through the stale dark as Frost padded ahead, each paw step soft but certain, ears swiveling with the tense precision of an animal hearing what no human ever could. The deeper they moved, the more the air shifted. It grew warmer, almost metallic, humming with the faintest vibration that Calder felt more in his bones than his ears. When the corridor finally opened into a square chamber, he sensed immediately that the place had been used far more recently than anyone would expect of an abandoned government bunker. Dust clung to everything, but tracks, fresh ones, broke the surface. Maps coated the far wall, pinned in neat rows, topographical prints of Silverpine Ridge layered with red circles, dotted lines, and handwritten notes in a careful engineer's script. Beneath them lay torn folders, shredded pages, and a bank of equipment, some smashed open, others strangely alive. A single monitor glowed dimly in the far corner, its greenish screen pulsing as if waiting for a command that had never arrived. May's breath left her in a trembling whisper. Calder caught the flicker of fear in her eyes, but beneath it glimmered something deeper. Recognition. "These markings," she murmured, tracing a finger near a red circle labeled Ridge Segment 4. "My father used to talk about sectors. He never explained why." Frost darted suddenly to the chamber's right side, barking once, sharp, warning, before a faint scrape echoed from behind a stack of metal crates. Calder tensed, shifting to put his body between May and the sound, hand drifting toward the revolver holstered beneath his jacket. A figure stepped out slowly, palms raised in a gesture that was meant to be placating but still trembled with nerves. He was a man well into his 60s, lean in the way of someone who had worked with his hands his whole life, his gray beard trimmed short, his denim shirt rolled to elbows, revealing sinewy forearms. His eyes, pale hazel, sharp despite age, held the weight of a man who had not slept in days. "Easy, son," the stranger rasped, his voice worn and low. "If I wanted you gone, I'd have stayed hidden until others got here. But I reckon time's short, and you deserve the truth while there's still a chance to decide what to do with it." May inhaled sharply. "Levi?" The man's face broke open with something like sorrow, something like relief. "May Whitlock. Lord above, you look just like your daddy said you would if you ever came back." Calder studied him, the posture of a man who knew he was hunted, the twitchy glance toward the doorway, the exhaustion in his bones. Levi Parker, who introduced himself with a stiff nod, was no drifter. He had the bearing of someone who had worked in systems and supervision, in the shadows of things larger than himself. "I worked with your father near the end," he told May, voice cracking. "Not official, not on paper. He trusted me with parts he didn't trust the boys upstairs with. Smart man, knew the project was warping into something it shouldn't be. He tried to stop it." May stiffened as though absorbing a blow. Calder saw her throat tighten. Levi continued, rubbing a thumb over the crease of a scar on his wrist as though recalling its origin. "The night he vanished. That wasn't an accident. It wasn't desertion. They called it a containment error. They made me sign that lie. Told me if I breathed a word, my family would be next in line for erasure." The weight of the word erasure made the air colder. Calder recalled the slashed names in the notebook, the quiet hopelessness in May's voice when she described them. Levi glanced toward the hallway. "They're coming," he murmured. "Not many. 3, maybe 4. Enough to tidy this place up and bury what's left." He reached into the satchel slung across his chest, producing a small black hard drive, lightweight, palm-sized, wrapped in a strip of worn cloth. "He left this with me," Levi said, holding it out to Calder. "Said if the day came his girl showed up in these mountains, she'd need to know the truth of why he didn't walk through the front door that night." May's fingers shook as she reached for the drive, but Calder took it instead, feeling the responsibility settle heavy in his grip. "What's on it?" he asked. Levi's eyes dimmed with memory. His last transmission. The real account of what happened the night the project crossed a line no decent man would tolerate. Your father died trying to stop something awful, May. Something they're still eager to finish if we don't get ahead of them. A distant metallic clatter echoed through the tunnel, boots hitting grates, calculating steps. Frost growled low in his throat, hackles rising. Calder knew that sound. Pursuit. Professional, disciplined, methodical. We need another way out, Calder said. Levi nodded grimly. There's a shaft on the far side, emergency exit. They never fully collapsed it, though it's tight. Leads into the timber near Elk Draw. He motioned to a narrow passage scarcely visible behind a tipped-over cabinet. The four of them, 3 humans and a dog, slipped through as the bunker began to stir with life not its own. Frost led at a quick trot, stopping now and then to sniff the shifting air currents. Calder kept a hand on May's back, steadying her where the ground dipped or the stone floor fractured. She stayed close, closer than she once had, and in that closeness Calder sensed a familiar spark threading its way back into the broken spaces between them. At one point the tunnel widened and Levi paused, bending slightly to catch his breath. Calder noticed the limp for the first time, the stiffness in his left knee. A long-ago injury, clearly, likely one he'd earned while
covering up someone else's sins. You all right? Calder asked quietly. Ain't been all right in 20 years, Levi muttered with a weary smile. But I can walk. As they pressed onward, May whispered to Calder, her voice barely brushing the stale air. I didn't leave because I wanted to, she said. I left because someone warned me they were watching the people closest to my father, people I cared about. Calder slowed, surprised. Her eyes glimmered in the faint flashlight glow, tired, scared, but honest. I thought running would keep you safe, she continued. It was the only thing I could think to do. Calder opened his mouth, closed it again. Words were clumsy instruments in moments like these, so he settled for brushing his knuckles against her hand, small, subtle, but enough to say, I hear you. Frost suddenly pushed ahead to a rough opening where faint daylight filtered through. That's the exit, Levi said. Once we're topside, keep low. If they've tracked us this far, they'll have a team circling the ridge. They crawled out one by one into the sharp mountain air. Dawn was lifting over Silverpine, a thin golden wash breaking across the treetops. But before Calder could take in the beauty of it, Levi grabbed his arm. This is where I leave you. Like hell, Calder shot back. But Levi's expression was resolute. If I slow you, they'll catch all of us. I've been dodging their shadow for decades. I can do it one more day. Buy you the time you need. He pressed 2 fingers to the hard drive still in Calder's hand. What's on there? It'll damn the whole rotten chain of command. Get it somewhere safe. May stepped forward, tears breaking loose in her eyes. Levi pulled her into a gentle, fatherly embrace. Your daddy loved you fiercely, he whispered. He died with your name on his breath. Don't ever let these mountains fool you into thinking he didn't fight for you until his last moment. Then he turned and slipped back toward the ridge, his fading silhouette merging with the forest as though the trees themselves opened to take him in. Calder and May didn't have long to grieve. Frost whined, nudging them in a particular direction, downhill, toward a narrow deer trail that wound between tall firs. Something guided the dog. Calder felt it too, a subtle pulsing in the mountain air, a tug like the forest itself urging them onward. They followed Frost, the world brightening with each step until the trees thinned and they emerged onto a small overlook. Below them, the valley stretched like a great green ocean, morning mist lifting in soft curls. They stood side by side, breath fogging gently, the terror of the bunker fading beneath the quiet awe of dawn.
May slipped her hand into Calder's, not desperately, not apologetically, just honestly, as though some old battle inside her had finally settled. Calder squeezed back, letting the silent promise between them take shape in the warming light. They didn't know how long they had until the hunters caught the trail again. They didn't know what truths the hard drive held, but they knew one thing with absolute clarity. They were no longer alone in the fight. And somewhere in the subtle glow of morning, through the rustle of branches, through Frost's steady stance, through the quiet strength of the mountain, something like grace seemed to watch over them. In the end, the mountains reminded us of a truth we often forget in the noise of everyday life. Even in the darkest valleys, even when secrets rise like storms and the path seems lost, there is a quiet strength watching over us. Some call it grace, some call it the hand of God. But whatever name you choose, it has a way of guiding the right people to one another at the moment they need it most. Calder and May walked through danger, the trail, and memories that hurt more than any wound. Yet every step they took was lit by something greater than fear. A loyal dog leading them when human eyes failed. A sunrise breaking through the trees when hope felt thin. A stranger risking everything to protect a promise. These were not accidents. They were small miracles, the kind that still happen in our world if we choose to see them. And maybe that is the lesson for all of us. Life will test you. It will bend you. It will push you into moments where you feel buried under more weight than you can carry. But God has a way of sending light through the cracks, through the people who stay beside you, through the courage you did not know you had, through the faith that whispers, you are not walking alone. If this story touched you, I invite you to share it with someone who might need that reminder today. Leave a comment and tell us what part spoke to you the most. And if you want to walk with us through more stories of hope, mystery, and the quiet miracles hidden in the mountains, subscribe to the channel. May God bless every one of you watching, guide your steps, and keep your homes filled with peace.